Bayonetta is possibly one of the most sexy and odd characters that people identify with Nintendo. A flirty, sexy witch that takes off almost all of her clothes to summon eldritch demons to fight against angels, devils, and more. Yet when Platinum Games moved to Nintendo for Bayonetta 2, she pretty much became an icon for the brand, and her entire trilogy is now available on the Switch. So let's dive into the third entry of the series that is filled with action, crazy set pieces, and a bit of controversy over voice acting and what they did with the ending. Here is my review of Bayonetta 3 for the Nintendo Switch. The story begins with Viola, a witch from an alternate universe that travels through Portal to come to Bayonetta, pleading for help in taking out a multiversal threat made by humans. After some convincing, Bayonetta and Jean agree to go with her in traveling from universe to universe, aiming to stop the human-created homunculi from destroying the multiverse. Now, I personally found the story to be pretty fun. There were some beats that didn't come off as well as others, like Viola as a character for most of the game, but it's a crazy ride to be able to see different worlds and different versions of Bayonetta from the alternate realities. When it comes to gameplay, Bayonetta 3 is a 3D action game with some light stealth and rail shooter elements thrown into the mix. The main gameplay loop is basically the same as the previous titles. You explore 3D environments and fight small and big enemies in fast-paced combat, going from just walking around areas and fighting enemies in the action combat to a lot of really interesting on-rails segments that show off the big set pieces. You've also got some other gameplay styles with Jean's side story chapters that are pretty much side-scrolling stealth games. Now, I want to say this game is more open with a sort of hub area that the other games didn't have, but really it's just different levels and chapters. You have an environment that connects the universes as you progress the story and go back to that environment, but it's more or less just part of each chapter with linear movement through a new area of the environment to get to the next portal. Though there is a certain level of exploration with walking around plants to collect currency or finding hidden gallery collectibles. As far as the actual gameplay loop, you get a fair balancing between exploring areas and being locked in to fight enemies and bosses for progression. Some areas have more exploration, like Viola's little adventure in the desert, whereas others are a bit tighter with more combat in the city areas. Now, speaking of Viola, this game introduces some different mechanics for playing the game. You can play as Bayonetta in the main levels, Jean in her side-scrolling minigame, and Viola on occasion in the 3D areas when the story is centered around her. Each character has different fighting styles, and the combat feels different even from Bayonetta 2. You still have physical attacks and projectiles with her guns, but it's more combo-oriented with throwing together punches and kicks for different finishers, and feels a bit more like a brawler than the constant sword slashes of Bayonetta 2. Viola especially feels different. Instead of dodging to activate the slow motion witch time, she has to guard and block with precision to activate it, and her attacks are just much slower with the big katana. And the further you go into the game, the more variety you get in the combat styles between range and the way you move. That's where the weapon and demon mechanics come in. Every time you go through a major chapter and interact with another universe's Bayonetta, you form a contract with their demon and gain their signature weapon. The first one, for example, is a set of throwable yo-yos giving you a lot more range. You basically get rollerblades to move around a lot faster without dashing, and you can even have mobility with climbing around as a spider girl. The game will also let you equip two of them at once to swap on the fly, something I love doing because I love the brawler style of being in Madame Butterfly mode, but I always swap on the fly to those rollerblades when I gotta get moving. Now, what Bayonetta 3 changed, which not everyone was a fan of, was summoning demons. In previous games, the finishing move for a combo summoned a part of the demon you were contracted with, like ending a combo with a projected Madame Butterfly high heel to crush or kick the enemy away. But in this game, you get a magic gauge and summon the entire demon to fight alongside you. Meaning you can have the huge Gamora Godzilla-like lizard next to you, or fighting while running around the ankles of the towering Madame Butterfly as she kisses and pummels bosses into the ground. I find this kind of cool, though it definitely lowers the overall difficulty of the series. Bayonetta was huge on learning good timing for dodges to activate witch time. Now those mechanics are still here, but having a demon fighting and stunning enemies alongside you definitely lowered the need for you to constantly go into witch time to do damage. Just have a demon kick and stun them and you can finish your combo without worrying about that attack they were winding up. The one thing I really like and thought was a great addition were the kaiju demon fights. Get to the end of a chapter and you're fighting an enormous boss, and Bayonetta rips her own heart out and summons not the regular sized Madame Butterfly that stands about 25-30 feet tall on her own, but a colossal version of her that is easily hundreds of feet tall to match or even surpass the overly sized boss she is gonna be fighting. Those fights I found a lot of fun, all the way down to the Gamora Godzilla fights that are slowed down to showcase the overall weight and movement of each of the giants. Now, as you do all of this stuff to fight and finish levels, you'll gain currencies to be able to buy from the Gates of Hell shop. You can grab accessories from here to enhance the experience, like doing auto combos to letting infernal demons control themselves while they are out to give you more control over Bayonetta. You can also grab special mirror costumes. This game has a bunch of new versions of Bayonetta with new designs from the different universes. So not only can you grab the mirrors to play as the Bayonetta 1 and 2 versions of her, but all of the new designs you encounter with different color palettes. And these costumes are reflected in cinematic cutscenes and not just gameplay. Now, all in all, I think all of this comes together pretty nicely, and the game has so much action and crazy stuff happening that it is just a bonkers thrill ride from start to finish. I would never have thought from the way it dragged me in, but it took me a good 20 hours to get through this game. And once you finish, you have some extra costumes, witch trials, new game plus for replaying chapters. Next up is presentation. Visually, I think the game looks great, at least in docked mode. Visuals are mostly on par and a bit better than from Bayonetta 2, though handheld mode does give you a bit more resolution lowering and blur than the previous titles. It still looks good, but not quite as smooth around the edges. And with performance, this is kind of difficult to gauge. It's good, but it's also not perfect. Bayonetta 3 strives for 60 FPS, but jumps around the 40s and 50s for most of the game. The good news is that it never drops under 30 FPS, so you'll still retain smooth gameplay throughout the entire adventure. You just won't have that constant 60 that you had in Bayonetta 2. And that's all I've got there, so let's go into battery life. On the original model, Bayonetta 3 has a battery range of 2 hours and 34 up to 2 hours and 50. The Nintendo Switch Lite gets a range of 2 hours and 39 up to 3 hours and 2. The Redboxer V2 2019 model gets a range of 4 hours and 47 up to 5 hours and 36. And the OLED model gets a range of 5 hours and 4 up to 6 hours and 16. In conclusion, Bayonetta 3 is here and is a crazy roller coaster of action, universe hopping, and intense kaiju battles. Now on the downside, not everything about the story series fans will fall in love with, and the frame rate struggles to stay at 60 FPS all the time. But if you're okay with the frame rate staying above 30 and keeping that amount of smooth flow, it's a great action game that'll draw you in and not let go until it's all over. Reviews to Go rates Bayonetta 3 for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.